The Donald Trump hush money criminal trial picks up later this morning, a day after Stormy Daniels finished taking the stand, testifying for more than 7 hours over a 2-day period. Yesterday, the defense aggressively tried to poke holes in Daniels' credibility, accusing her of extortion, rehearsing her testimony, and changing her story over the years, all of which Daniels denied, going toe-to-toe with the defense attorney in several sharp exchanges. At one point, Daniels said if she were making up her sexual encounter with Trump, she would have written a much better story. Also during cross-examination, Daniels testified she never spoke to Trump about the $130,000 hush money payment she received from former Trump attorney Michael Cohen, and had no knowledge of whether Trump was aware of or involved in that transaction. When pressed, Daniels also noted she did not negotiate directly with Cohen either, but that her lawyer at the time, Keith Davidson, did. Meanwhile, Judge Juan Merchan, for a second time, denied a request for a mistrial from Trump's lawyers. Trump attorney Todd Blanche claims Stormy Daniels' testimony this week describing her alleged sexual encounter with Trump was unfairly prejudicial to the former president. But the judge ruled Trump's lawyers had opened the door to that detailed testimony when they asserted in their opening statement no sex had occurred, putting the jury in the position of choosing who to believe. All right, let's bring in former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos. Good morning to you both. Lisa, I'll start with you. Down at the courthouse again yesterday, you were there. Take us inside the room, because just reading through this transcript, watching how combative it appeared to be, how Stormy Daniels held her own and held her ground as defense attorneys tried again to shred her credibility, to poke holes in her story. What were your takeaways yesterday?
Stormy Daniels is the rare witness who's better on cross-examination than she is on direct, Willie. She really held her ground. That's an understatement against some withering attack by the defense. But one of the things that I think is really interesting about yesterday's cross is, as our colleague Vaughn Hilliard observed yesterday, what they didn't attack her for. And really, the core of the story about her sexual encounter with Donald Trump was not among the things that they tried to peel away or attack. They asked her, for example, for 7 pages in the transcript to clarify whether they did or did not have dinner. They also tried to make her say that her story about whether she walked to dinner was or was not inconsistent. But the core of the story remained intact. And the most that Susan Necheles did was say that it was incredulous to her that Stormy Daniels, having acted in 150 to 200 pornography movies, would be scared or surprised to come out of the bathroom to find Donald Trump on the bed for her. And of course, Stormy Daniels had a nice retort to that, which is to say, look, if it had been my husband, I see my husband naked all the time, but to open that bathroom door and to find Donald Trump lying on the bed for me at 60 years old, more than twice my age, and much larger than me, yeah, that was surprising to me. And so the implication that they were trying to make throughout the day, that because Stormy Daniels has been an exotic dancer or an adult film actor, that she should have seen this coming and indeed would not have been shocked by it, I think fell flat during the day. That having been said, they did poke a little bit, here and there at the margins. They definitely exposed some inconsistencies. But we're also talking about a story that happened 18 years ago. And as a witness processes a story over time, as we change culturally too, it's also of no surprise to me that maybe the Stormy Daniels in 2024 processing what happened in 2006 sees those events differently. It's really impossible to put yourself back in the position that you would have been even in fall of 2016 in telling that story, Willie.
So, Danny, 7.5 hours or so of testimony from Stormy Daniels over a couple of days. Truly, you just have to stop and consider the surreal, historic nature of it. A porn actress sitting across from a former president of the United States making these accusations at him while he's in the middle of a presidential campaign, by the way. But from your point of view, from where you're sitting, at the end of the day, what kind of witness was Stormy Daniels for the prosecution?
Unnecessary. Stormy Daniels, in my view, represents an unnecessary risk for the prosecution. Here's why. I can't think of any piece of evidence that they got from Stormy Daniels on the prosecution that they couldn't have gotten or didn't already get from other witnesses. The transaction from Cohen to Daniels was established through other witnesses, including Keith Davidson, her former lawyer. To the extent that the value of her story increased as the election approached, we've already heard that evidence from other witnesses. So you may say, well, look, Stormy Daniels was about context, and that's true. But when you think about all the other witnesses, Madeleine Westerhout, Hope Hicks, people with really unimpeachable credibility, if you could get that evidence from them, why risk Stormy Daniels? Because you saw in Stormy Daniels a request for a mistrial, which was going to be denied. But in my view, the very first major appealable issue that you might see up at the appellate division. So if the prosecution gets a conviction, and this case comes back in 2 years and it's overturned, the conviction, then the prosecution's going to ask themselves, was it worth the risk? If the reason that the conviction's overturned is testimony that was given by Stormy Daniels, especially if they could have gotten that information from somewhere else. And I'll just say, look, I'm in the minority. I don't think Stormy Daniels performed particularly well on cross-examination. Witnesses, she's one of those witnesses that just decided, I am not going to give a yes or no answer because I know that's what the cross-examining attorney wants. She fought back at every turn. And yes, to some extent, did she zing Donald Trump and the cross-examining attorney, Susan Necheles? Yes, but at the same time, witnesses who refuse to answer yes or no, refuse to give an inch, sometimes juries see them as concealing things. And that's what Stormy Daniels did. It may have played well with the jury. It might not have as well.
Danny, okay, so I want to just try and push back on this because I'm curious what you think of the fact that it would be obvious that the defense would try and undermine her credibility, really try and, put a frame around the incredulousness of her story. And who else would have the information like what was in his toiletry kit or other things that would prove that there was a transaction for sex? I mean, how else would they do that? Are you saying there was a different route they could take? Because she's the one with that information that ultimately makes that connection.
No, we're actually mostly on the same page. I mean, the point to be made is that the testimony could have simply been, we had sex. And I've heard that argument. It's a fair argument that all those details are important to establish that this happened. And Judge Merchan did point out that in their opening, the defense said, they didn't have to say this, that there was no sex. So arguably, they opened the door to those details. But again, the proof is really in the fact that this is the first request for a mistrial. And the point, Judge Merchan himself said we got into detail that we didn't need to get into, but you, defense, you weren't objecting, so I don't know what was going on there. So it's really not even me. It's Judge Merchan himself expressed doubt. And it's very rare for a judge, sua sponte, on his own, to say, hey, you know what? Some of that testimony, it wasn't so, it went a little too far. So if Judge Merchan is saying that, they have it now on the record, and you better believe when they take that to the appellate division, they're going to take that little portion of the transcript and put it right in front of the judges and make their argument. So again, I just go back to the fact that, yes, you can say that the detail helped with the context. Yes, he used Old Spice. And yes, he had the satin pajamas. And that is, that helps show that she's credible. But the defense correctly pointed out, this is not a sexual assault case. This is a false entries in business records and then maybe some other crime that we're not entirely sure what it is that was being concealed yet. I'm sure we'll find out at some point. But it's not a sex assault case. And that's the defense's argument. And even Justice Merchan acknowledged that they may have a point. Not enough for a mistrial, but there's a point to be made there.
Right. The judge rejected their request for a mistrial, also rejected their efforts, Trump's attorney's efforts to loosen the gag order, that he could go after Stormy Daniels because she's no longer a witness. But he said, look, that could be a chilling effect for other witnesses. So he kept it in place. So, Lisa, two for you. One would be, do you agree that Stormy Daniels was an unnecessary risk? Tell us what you think, whether they should have called her or not. And then talk to us a little bit about who else we heard from yesterday, including Madeleine Westerhout, who is known as Trump's gatekeeper in the West Wing.
Let's start with whether I agree with Danny. I actually do agree with Danny that she was an unnecessary witness. That having been said, I also think that when you're thinking about this case writ large, there's sort of two parts to it, right? There is the falsification of business records, and there's the underlying crime that Donald Trump is allegedly trying to conceal. And the prosecution has made clear at this point that that's a conspiracy to promote his own election through unlawful means. On the back end, the evidence of Trump's own involvement is less direct than it is on the front end. You've got a lot of people talking about his involvement in the conspiracy. Very few who can talk about his direct participation and the cover-up of that crime. Michael Cohen really being the only one who will come to trial and say that. So you've got to compensate somehow by showing he had a motive to do it, and that plus the circumstantial evidence of his involvement to take you over the line. I would guess that what the prosecution is trying to do with Stormy Daniels here is show, because her story was so credible, because she remembers all these messy details, he absolutely had the motive to work with Michael Cohen and David Pecker to ensure her story never saw the light of day, and thereafter cover that up through the business records falsification that we've seen the direct evidence of. In terms of Madeleine Westerhout, she was, in many respects, a mixed bag because she was a terrific character witness for Donald Trump, a man she really loves and to whom she feels a great amount of gratitude. She could not have been more effusive in her praise for him as a great boss, as a family man. On the other hand, she is the connective tissue in the falsification loop. She is the person who at the White House presented him with the checks to sign. She said he read everything before he signed it, and then she was presented with some evidence showing how careful Trump was about his money, including an email with Rona Graff about whether or not Donald Trump wanted to buy a $650 Tiffany frame to put a picture of his mother in to sit in the Oval Office. And Rona Graff sort of doubting, well, you should ask him whether he wants to buy this. This is kind of pricey. The implication is this is a person who is A, micromanagerial, B, tight-fisted, and the fact that he signed 9 checks repeatedly for $35,000, this is a man who knew what he was doing and wanted to do it.
Okay, so Stormy Daniels, a mixed bag as to what the prosecution got out of it. The next big event will be Michael Cohen. How soon do you predict that he's going to go on the stand, and what are the risks and the rewards of having him come and testify?
You want to take this one?
Oh, I think you're better at predicting next, for sure.
I think at this point, Elise, we've seen a lot of the witnesses that we expect. So just in looking at a countdown list, who's left, there aren't that many people left to hear from. So I would expect we'll hear from Michael Cohen relatively soon, perhaps as soon as next week. In terms of what they hope to get from him, Michael Cohen is the one witness who sees this story through from start to finish, from the very formation of the conspiracy in August of 2017 to the very end of the repayment scheme in December of 2017. So they need Michael Cohen to thread it all together. That having been said, think about Michael Cohen sort of as an earthquake-damaged building around which the DA has built a lot of scaffolding in the form of documentary evidence. We've seen texts, we've seen emails, we've seen bank statements, we've seen general ledger entries. We have seen so much evidence, including excerpts from 3 books that Trump wrote to show his modus operandi, right? Like attack, 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 never trust anyone, manage your own money, all of those things in Trump's own words, devastating. And I predict today, or as soon as today, we will see what is, I think, the best evidence of all. 3 tweets from May of 2018 where Donald Trump essentially confesses to the business records crime by saying, yeah, I repaid Michael Cohen, and there's nothing wrong with that. That will be devastating in and of itself. That said, Michael Cohen is the narrator. Count on him to come in and almost be like a summary witness. All the things that you just heard, I'm going to string together for you.
So, Danny, let's take the other side of this, though. Where are the problems with Michael Cohen?
Well, Michael Cohen has huge problems, and I predict that all the pushback you heard from Stormy Daniels, the inability to answer a question yes or no, and to instead try to fight on every single leading question, you're going to see that doubly with Michael Cohen. He used to be a lawyer. Presumably, he understands what leading questions are. He's going to want to fight back. This is his moment in the sun, just like it was for Stormy Daniels. It's a good opportunity for him to be in the spotlight, which he enjoys. So I expect that he is going to fight tooth and nail on cross-examination, which, by the way, doesn't always work. When you fight with a cross-examining attorney, maybe it's great for headlines. Maybe it's, we perceive it outside the courthouse as taking a swing at the defense. But in court, it doesn't always play that well. In terms of timing, I actually think we'll see Michael Cohen sooner than later. One of the things I feel, just thinking about this as a defense attorney, that I think the prosecution has done very well is move very quickly. And I can tell you that when you're a defense counsel, that is disorienting, especially when, in this case, you don't have a solid witness list and you don't know who's next. It can really throw you off. If the prosecution moves quickly enough, you can be left saying, wait, I wasn't ready for, oh my gosh, I didn't ask all the questions I wanted to ask. I wasn't ready for that witness. And it can create chaos at the defense table. So I think that's something they've done strategically. I don't know if it's intentional, but it certainly feels that way. By being efficient, you keep the defense on their heels. And I think that may be what's going on here.
Yeah, I'll just say as a watcher, it was disorienting. It was like, wow, look at they just keep bringing them in. So, Lisa, I'll ask you this, and I'm wondering if it backs up Danny's point about Stormy. There was word yesterday that Karen McDougal would not be brought to the stand. Is that related at all to Stormy's no? Okay.
No,
and then talk about the
why.
speed of this trial.
Yeah, I mean, the reason Karen McDougal isn't coming in is because she really is unnecessary. Karen McDougal is part of the conspiracy, but when we're talking about the falsification of business records, the Karen McDougal payment has nothing to do with that. The falsification of business records is about the repayment to Michael Cohen of the money for the Stormy Daniels settlement and then some. Karen McDougal was paid by American media. There's nothing that she has to do with that back half of the case that forms the crime.
All right, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Savalos. Thank you both very much. What a week it was, and it continues next week.